Today we're going to be talking about if letting your ex go is a viable strategy for getting them to come back. Now, how does the famous quote go? If you love something, let it go. If it returns, it's yours. If it doesn't, it wasn't. If you love someone, set them free. If they come back, they're yours. If they don't, they never were. Now, that quote has been the basis for thousands of different romantic comedies and philosophies over the years. But what we're going to be exploring today is looking at real-life data to determine if that actually works. So if you don't know who I am or how this YouTube channel works, my name is Chris Sider, and for the past decade, I've been working with men and women to help them get over their breakups or even help them get back together with their exes. So I feel like I have a pretty good idea on if this quote works or not. And today we're going to be looking at real life situations from my clients to determine really if there's any merit to it. But first, if you're curious to see if you even have a chance of getting your particular ex back after your particular breakup, I've got great news for you. On my website, www.exboyfriendrecovery.com, I put together a special quiz that's designed to basically show you an approximate idea of what your chances are of getting your ex back. Now, if that sounds like something you're interested in, the whole quiz should only take you 2 minutes, and all you have to do to take it is simply look in the description link below this YouTube video and click on it. It's literally that simple. So let's just cut right to the chase here and answer the all-knowing question of if letting an ex go actually works to get them back. Well, the answer is that it does to a point. In 2015, I created something called the Ex-Boyfriend Recovery Podcast. Essentially, it was a podcast where every week I would take a listener question about a situation regarding their ex and answer it. Now, initially when I started the podcast, I was a little curious to see how successful it would be because I didn't know if people would be even willing to share their problems in a vast medium. Right away, what struck me was just how willing people were to share really intimate details about their situations. It taught me a lot about the people that I was helping, but more than anything, it taught me something new about what's working right now. And I'll never forget probably the second question that was asked of me in the podcast. The woman had been a long-time reader of my website, and she had been trying to get her ex back for the course of a year. Eventually, about midway through the year, she just threw up her hands and said, "I give up. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm over with it." She moved on. She ended up starting her own business and being extremely successful at that. She went on a few dates. She wasn't dating anyone new, but she was getting out there and just trying to move on from the pain and heartbreak that the first breakup had caused. This is where something interesting happened. She calls into my podcast show and asks me, "Hey, this really weird thing has been happening. I've moved on from my ex completely. We've been broken up for about 1.5 years. But now he's trying to get back with me all of a sudden. I tried to get back with him at first, but he didn't want anything to do with me. But now that I've moved on and had a successful business, he wants to be with me all of a sudden. Why is this?" Now, what's interesting about that question is that it became the first pattern I started noticing on a long-term scale. So what does that mean? Well, sometimes, as you may have determined, it can be a little difficult to get an ex back. In fact, most of the time the odds are against you if you don't know what you're doing. So the clients who were doing seemingly everything right, I started saying, well, why don't you try just moving on from your ex? And uncannily, more often than not, after they moved on from their ex, they would notice their ex would start to show interest in them again. So is this that moving on and letting them go and them coming back sort of quote idea? Well, maybe. Over the years, as I start to see this pattern develop, I gave it my own term. I started saying, all right, let's call it moving on without actually moving on. But what's interesting is that moving on alone isn't enough to make an ex want to come back to you. In fact, I've identified 4 things that need to happen in conjunction with letting your ex go if you want the maximum chance of them wanting to come back to you. Thing number 1, Sometimes your ex will need a little bit of a push. I'm a big believer in causation, or cause and effect. I don't just believe that letting go of your ex and moving on from them is enough alone to make them want to come back. There are certain things that need to occur. One of the things that you may notice is that you sometimes have to give your ex a little push. Now that push can come in the form of many different things. For some, it can be simply seeing you be successful. You know, Frank Sinatra once said the best revenge in life is massive success. Well, like that person who called in my very first podcast episode, she mentioned that she had this very successful business that took off and her ex had taken note of that. Sometimes you need something to change along the way for you to get really the best shot of them taking notice of you. Thing number 2, change must occur. So I feel like I seamlessly led from thing number 1 into thing number 2 because really they're interconnected. If your ex is going to want to come back to you, something has to change. Albert Einstein famously said, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result each time." If you don't change a variable in the equation, your ex is just going to look at you as the same person. I'll give you an example. One of the things I always recommend to my clients is trying to understand your ex's state of mind when he or she breaks up with you. Sometimes they have these preconceived notions about who you are as a person. And one of the things I recommend to them is challenge that preconceived notion, because if you can challenge the preconceived notion, something will have changed. They will view you in a new and different way, and that's a good thing. Thing number 3, don't base your whole life around your ex. So in the end, I think this really comes down to priorities. You see, there's something kind of wrong about you making your ex priority number 1 the entire time. Sometimes that can be extremely unattractive to a man. So I always tell my clients, look, you have to be willing to lose the guy to get the guy. The number 1 mistake I see people making all the time after a breakup is that they make their whole lives around getting an ex back. But really, love is just one small section of your entire life. I talk a lot about this concept of the Holy Trinity: health, wealth, and relationships. And that's that concept basically distilled down to its simplest form. Your life is just more than relationships. You also have health. You also have wealth. But also, when you look at the relationship subcategory, there's more to relationships than just your romantic relationships. You have relationships with your friends, your family, co-workers, etc. Don't just get this one-track mind where you're just so focused on getting your ex back that you throw everything else by the wayside. That's not a good way to approach it. Thing number 4, looking for an ex to make you feel good is not the way to go. So they've done these really interesting studies in children recently based on praise. So essentially they found that if you overpraise or underpraise a child, it can be harmful to them. So what do I mean by overpraising? Well, I think it all comes down to realistic type of praise. So more often than not, if you overpraise a child for going to the bathroom, they're going to get kind of an inflated sense of self. But if you don't praise them at all, they're going to not want to go to a bathroom. Weird analogy, I know, but I'm gonna bring it back home here because I feel like so often many of you guys are looking for your relationships to be the cure-all for all of your problems. I think the important thing is, if you're doing that, then that means your happiness is going to be wholly reliant on that relationship. And ultimately, you're gonna be in for a rude awakening when that person doesn't make you happy. Don't look for other people to make you happy. Make yourself happy first. Hey, thank you so much for getting to the end of this video. If you haven't already, make sure you check out our Ex Recovery Chances quiz. It's a simple 2-minute quiz that you can use and link to in the description link below. So click on that when you get a chance. Oh, also don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. I'll see you next time.